Welcome to the Joy Work Show, the podcast that goes beyond the surface of business, right to the heart, to explore the real joy and the stories behind success. Not just the moments of celebration, but the challenges that pave the way for them. Hiya, I'm Diane, and here we know that joy isn't just about the good times. Often the greatest joy comes right after the greatest challenge. And that sentence means more to me introducing this episode than perhaps it has at other times. In today's episode, I'm joined by Clare Deacon, and we're talking about something that impacts every single one of us, whether we acknowledge it or not: trauma. Clare is a trauma-informed positive psychologist. She is an author, she is a speaker, and she is a wonderful human being. And what Clare reminds us, even after going through one of the greatest traumas that I think any human being could possibly go through, Clare reminds us that trauma isn't always about those big headline-making events, even though when you hear her story, hers definitely was. It can be the smaller, everyday moments that shape how we think, how we feel, and how we show up in life and business. And what I love about Clare's approach is that it's resource orientated. It's not about keeping us stuck in the past. It's about moving through. It's about acknowledging. It's about accepting. And it's about continuing and building and beyond it for your life. This is a conversation about resilience, healing, and the kind of joy that comes when we finally step out of survival mode. But as always, and definitely in this case, it's better to hear from the guests themselves. So let's go. Hi, Clare, and welcome to the Joy Work Show today. I am thoroughly delighted to welcome you here, and I get to learn all about you at the exact same time as the listeners. I've read about you, I've had a look at what you're doing in the online space, and I'm really excited for our conversations. But as always, it's best to hear from you. So, Clare, let us know who you are, what you do, and how you got here.
So thank you so much, first of all, Diane, for having me here today. I'm really pleased. Obviously, joy is a topic which I'm pretty passionate about, being that my business is called Happier.
Yes.
So I'm Clare Deacon, and I'm a trauma-informed positive psychology coach and therapist, and I'm the author of Blooming Happier. So I started out in my business something I started to explore after the unexpected death of my husband. So in 2016, my world was turned upside down, and it was a real moment for me, a poignant moment where, given the history of growing up, where I had a difficult childhood, etc., I'd been through lots of different events, lots of different times where I'd always felt that I fought to keep my head above water. And I thought I had gone past that and set up this beautiful family, a loving husband and home. And then that was taken away from me. And I was at a point where it was like, what is the point? Why keep fighting? And I had 3 small children who were depending on me, whose world had just been shattered. So I made the decision that I was going to rebuild, but this time I wasn't going to do it in a survival way. I was going to thrive, and I had no idea what that was going to take, but I was determined that the dreams that my husband and I had for our children weren't going to end there, that his legacy wasn't going to be a broken family and one of sadness. And whatever it took, if I was going to fight, and I had no choice in taking on that fight, I was going to live and find my happier life. So that sent me on a path of exploration, a real journey, if you like, where I left the corporate world that I had been working in for 20 odd years, walked away from it all, much to the unapproving, I would say, or questionable responses from friends, family, peers, all a bit shocked and wondering whether I was making that right choice, and decided to kind of just explore what else the world could offer me without the limitations that I'd probably put on myself before from being in that survival mindset. So I took a year where I obviously had to help my children in their own recovery. My twins had only just turned 5 when my husband passed, and my eldest was 8. So they were very young and they needed a lot from me too. And I needed a lot because I was unpicking not just the events that had happened around the loss of my husband, but also all of those events that had happened for my whole life. So it was a real journey. So I went through all different types of therapy, from doing drumming in the woods and yoga and Pilates and singing and making pottery and hypnotherapy and EFT and anything that I could really try to see how that worked for me. And then I returned to university to study psychology, came across positive psychology and knew that that is what I wanted to do. And I guess it was one of the biggest light bulb moments in my life was understanding the science around post-traumatic growth and finding that joy after events have happened. And it was a real moment for me, which made me rewrite that story that I had been living under, that I hadn't had to endure all of those events, but those events enabled me to get to the position that I am today. And I get to have a legacy in the world where I get to help other people find their happier and not be stuck in that survival mode. And that's
Firstly,
how Happier was born.
firstly, I am so sorry that a traumatic event like losing your husband, I'm so sorry you had to go through that to get to where you are now. But what is stand out and when I'm listening to you, and you've quite taken my breath away, to be perfectly honest, because I think for somebody to acknowledge that through trauma they were in that survival mode and use that then as an opportunity to, I think you said, to not do this in survival anymore, but then to thrive. It's astounding. It's astounding that you found the strength. And as you said, you took a year and, you tried all of the things and were there for the children, which I can't even imagine as a mum of 2 wee ones, where you even begin to do that. I think it's very much a lived experience, not something you can even begin to imagine. But to get to that point and to know that you want to move forward. And you said like family and friends, like leaving the corporate, because they would have seen that as security. They would have seen that as that was your and your children's security and you were walking away from that. So what do you think it was that built that belief in you, that you knew? Maybe you didn't know right at the start you were on the right path, but what was it in you? Is it simply that you'd been through the trauma and you were not kind of going back?
There was no certainty in anything. Certainty had fallen out of my world,
Yeah.
had all gone. Nothing was certain. Nothing feels certain. And it's learning to live in the acceptance of that and knowing that you're never going to be able to, no matter what you do, avoid life's challenges. Doesn't matter who you are, how much you earn, what you surround yourself with, how much you try and hide, you can still be impacted. So I think what actually happened was the acknowledgement of how much you actually already have and how much you can lose more. So it's a bit of protection. I think the thing is also when trauma happens to you, and it was said to me, although I never went for formal diagnosis, because for me, that wasn't right. For others, it might be right. And I don't want to discredit that. But for me, my therapist said to me, they identified that I had PTSD symptoms from the death of my husband, which had re-triggered CPTSD from things in my childhood, which is where everything kind of came together. And when you're in that state, your capacity to think and for your brain to function is very limited. And that's biologically how you're supposed to work. Now, I didn't know that at the time. I've gone back to university and done all the studying and understanding and looked at the science of how it works. So And it kind of throws you off that you haven't got capacity to think and rationalize and understand stuff. But I went back into my job initially so I had some time off with the children. At first, went back into the corporate world and found myself sat at my desk, not really knowing what on earth I was doing there. I'd already been contemplating that it wasn't an ideal place that I wanted to be, but I didn't know, and I didn't have the courage to do something different. So now I find myself back there, and I'm like, of all the things I could be doing in the world, why am I sat here doing something which I'm no longer inspired to do? And what a waste, because I had just learnt that in the matter of moments, your life can be over. So if I have the privilege of a life, of breathing in and out, of spending my time with my children, what on earth am I doing in a role that didn't fulfill me and I wasn't happy in? So I worked in a project management, program management, strategic world. So I did large scale business re-engineering, mergers, those kind of things. So you can imagine a lot of my skills were around planning and strategy and organization and control. And some of that was learned behaviors because it helped me deal with a world where there was trauma in it. And that's why I had got so good at those skills. So it was a big deal for me to make a decision to leave the corporate world without a plan. You know, I was someone who lived and breathed having a 5-10 year plan and course of action. So I had sat there and I had made a decision that as soon as I knew what that plan was, I would give myself permission to leave the corporate world, but I needed to have a plan. And it was a matter of probably only weeks where I just sat with that blank piece of paper, and the reality was I didn't have capacity to make the plan, and my head just wasn't clear enough. I couldn't think that through. Fear would take over, all of those what ifs, all of that, the harsh reality of making all of those decisions suddenly, and I'm making them on my own for myself and my children, and I can't be in a position of risk, kind of just wrapped me up in more fear. But the catalyst that made that change was one day I sat there stuck in fear of what if it all went wrong if I left, and trying to force some kind of certainty to make it go right, when I realized that actually I had been through everything I had been through in my life, and I had got there the first time round. So if it all goes wrong, then I start all over again and I go back and I do what I did.
Absolutely.
So what would I do if I left the corporate world and went on an adventure, whatever that was, and it didn't go right? Well, what I would do is I would dust off my old CV, polish it up, and I would go and find another job and work. Even if it meant that I had gone backwards in my career levels, I would try again. The alternative would be to be sat at that desk in turmoil, in fear, and find myself still there in a year's time. A year of my life, another year of my life that I had wasted not living in joy. So how I flipped it, the fear of missing out, the fear of wasting time, of never trying became greater than the fear of failure. It left me
And
with no
that's it, isn't
choice.
it? It's time will pass anyway. That time is going to go, and you were taught it seemingly over and over again, but certainly through your husband, that that time is finite, and we never know when that, can come. People can get clues, and we can get illnesses, and other things can happen, but ultimately we really don't know like what tomorrow's going to bring. And if we don't make these decisions to go, it's exactly the same. You could have been sitting there. That's where you could be sitting today instead of doing this. And you could still be sitting there thinking. And then also, like, for your children, was it a factor for you that if they've already been through this very traumatic event really early in their life, they've already seen pretty as hard as life can get, So was it about showing them that actually, look what life can still look like. Look what, you can go after your dreams. You can do that. Because I know even in my life for my children, that's a huge part of my why, but I've not been through the trauma that you have to make that rationalization of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess one of the points that's really demonstrates how a child feels is that it was my eldest's birthday within 2 weeks of his dad passing. And on the morning of his birthday, he got up and came downstairs to how we used to do it. We used to play like party music to wake them up and have happy birthday playing on all the speakers through the house. And they would come down and there would be a big cheer and they would have all their presents. And we still did that on the morning of his birthday. And he turned around to me and he said, after that initial lull, and he said, I didn't think I'd have a birthday anymore. I didn't think we'd celebrate. That's how it impacts that they're never going to be happy again. Now, anyone who's a parent is going to know there is nothing in this world that you're going to do to prevent you from teaching your children that it's not the end, that they deserve everything. They deserve all of the happiness in the world. And not, truly, genuinely, not just for them, but also for my husband. My husband was a happy person. He was known in our village that he always had a smile on his face. He would always help anyone and everyone that he, you know, had fun and brought life. His name was Dave and he was known as Disco Dave because after the village pub closed, everyone used to come back to ours and we used to end up having this impromptu disco in our house. And that is where I want his legacy to be. I want him to be remembered as Disco Dave, of the true gent that people see him as, the person who always had a smile on his face, not the person who died. And it is a challenge in society. People have said to my children, well, you don't have a dad. And there's nothing that infuriates me more because they do have a dad. He just doesn't live on earth with us. He is in their hearts and he is part of their blood and he's part of their whole spirit and he lives on. This year will be 9 years since he passed away. I still probably almost every day would say something like, Daddy would do this, or that would be funny, or Daddy, and relate it so they understand, even as they grow, how their dad would have reacted, so they can understand and get a clear point of view on a personality, which they wouldn't have seen when they were the age they were.
I was going to say they were
At
so
the
young.
time, Yeah. Yeah, they were.
It's
They were.
amazing.
And, understanding loss and what that means for them. And, they're still discovering now that how much they have lost. When they were that age, when they first lost him, children of a capacity that they think about what's in their day, what's in their moment, what's in their week. They don't think about longer term, what that means for them, the things that their dad is not going to be there for. Us as adults, we see that.
Mhm.
We see all of the future that they have lost. But as children, they don't see that. They are more in the moment, which is beneficial, but they're also trying to get to grips with what death actually means and what that reality is. The questions that I would have to deal with and answer, like, well, why can't we fix him? And why are there bad people in the world when he was a good person? Why would it happen to him? If he's in the sky as a star, why can't we get a rocket ship and go and see him? It's all of those things, the level of conversation you have to have. But for Father's Day, we actually had his funeral on his birthday. And that was so that we could make it a celebration of life. It was the day that he was welcomed into the world. And it was the day that we said a goodbye to him and celebrated everything that he was. But with the children, we we'll talk about him and we find where joy exists for us. And we have a laugh about some of the silly things that Daddy would have done and would have said. And we send him our love and we celebrate him. Obviously, there's always going to be tears. There's always going to be sadness. And that's important too. And it's important that those live alongside each other. I think it's very difficult when we talk about joy, when I say I'm a positive psychologist, that it's not about that toxic positivity of believing that everything has to be shiny and happy. It doesn't. And that's not good for you either. I've called my business Happier, and I call it Happier rather than happy because it's a journey. It's that next step. No matter where your starting point is, the work I do with individuals is to get you to that next level, because it's not this euphoric utopia place of sunshine and rainbows that we all have. And the reality is we achieve the greatest growth. We achieve those feelings of success and accomplishment. They come from being uncomfortable. They come from adversity. They come from challenge. That's where we find that deeper grit to go that step further. It doesn't come from, we're not motivated as individuals to take those bigger steps off of success. We take them from wanting to move forward from discomfort. That's where we learn.
Absolutely.
Because it's too uncomfortable to stay where we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you've interjected joy throughout. Obviously, it is the Joy Work Show. But what's really important and where we are completely aligned is obviously my business is the podcast is the Joy Work Show. I have a community, the Joy Work Club. I've got a members club of the same name. And it's when I told people that I was putting joy on things that I was doing, they kind of laughed at me because I'm not naturally the most joyous person in the world. If there's a negative way to look at something, I'll find it. I like to know the beginning, middle, and end of everything. And it has been said that I've not got the greatest sense of humour in the world. So, I'm not a naturally joyous person, but like you have to look for the joy. And I decide to get up every day and make a decision that I'm going to find the joy today. And even though there might be tough things going on in my life and there might be difficult things going on, there will be some joy there. And I can't let it pass me by. I can't let it just slip by without being seen because I'm being too fed up with myself, too much in a bad mood or feeling sorry for myself or whatever it may be. And that doesn't mean I'm not human. That doesn't mean I don't have a good cry. It mean that I don't sit on the sofa with a bar of chocolate when I'm, fed up and just want to watch a movie. I do all of those things because actually then I find a wee bit joy in that too. So, it's so important to do that. And the fact that you could see that in those darkest times, and it's when you said about your son and the birthday, and coming down. And I always say to people, the birthdays and the balloons will always come, but it's seeing the joy in the in between that's the really important. It's the everyday stuff. It's the cuddle in the morning. It's the moments that you and your children have probably been so in such a difficult position and so upset together, but there would have been joy in that because it's a shared experience. And it's a shared experience and it's keeping your husband alive. It's keeping who he is and who that he is to your children and having all of these moments. And that to me is joy too. That's
Yeah.
so, so important. So important. Now you have mentioned positive psychology. So there's lots of people that would love to know that because I think there is that belief that it's like toxic positivity, and this is kind of bandied about, especially in the online space, this toxic positivity. So for people who've never experienced positive psychology before, what is it?
So positive psychology is termed as being the science of happiness. So when I talk
Which
about
I love that,
happiness,
by the way.
So when I talk about happiness, I'm talking about not that feeling of elation, not that in the moment excitement. I'm talking about that level of fulfillment and contentment and just feel good factor. And what that looks like for you is different to what it looks like for me and for everyone. And I talk about your happier being kind of a recipe of all different ingredients and in different amounts as well. So you say that, people have said to you, well, you're not funny or make joke, whatever. Well, that part of your ingredient that goes into the pot is smaller than someone else's. It doesn't mean that you don't find happiness, that you don't have joy in your life. It means that that's a smaller ingredient for you because you've got a bigger ingredient, which might be that chocolate bar on the sofa. I'm not a fan of chocolate, so chocolate doesn't come into my happiness.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a nerd, so reading and understanding a science book, that comes into my joy. And we each have, and we need to celebrate that uniqueness of ourselves and own the part of ourselves. I'm sure my daughter won't mind me saying, but one of the things is she, and I guess maybe she gets this from me, is people are quite often surprised in my personality that I do things differently. I don't know why they expect me to be a certain way, but people seem surprised that I'm a bit quirkier than they stereotype me to be. And that comes out. And, that's a trait that my daughter shows, very different characteristic to myself. But sometimes, people will say to her, "You're a bit weird, you are." And her response to that is, "Thank you."
Brilliant.
And, it's something that I celebrate with her, with my children. And actually, it's in my book as well. Who wants to be normal? I mean, look it up in the dictionary what normal means. It means plain, ordinary, and somewhat boring.
Mm-hmm.
So why celebrate being normal? We need to celebrate our individuality, and that includes what brings us happiness, what's important for us, and what brings us contentment. So positive psychology looks at how you achieve that level of contentment, that level of fulfillment. That's what it's about. It's not about singing and dancing and joy and jumping up and down and that particular part of emotion. But positive psychology works with strengths. So this is really, really important. So one of the things that I found as I went on my path of therapy is that a lot of our mental health system is out of date. It's based in outdated science that we know doesn't work anymore because our understanding of the brain and the body has moved on through technology and advancements. We can understand it that much better. But our mental health system is based on an illness ideology. So when you go to the doctor, they ask you what's wrong with you and they try and make the thing that's wrong with you right. And just like with traditional counseling methods and techniques, they'll talk to you about everything that was wrong. So, and what we actually know about is what we focus our attention on is what we get achieved. So when counsellors, therapists work with individuals where they go over and over again traumatic experiences and negativity, what it does is embeds that into your neural pathways even more. So it brings up more fear, more conditioning. It brings all of those neurochemicals out that trigger your fight or flight system, your central nervous system. So positive psychology is about changing all of that, is about focusing on the good, the potential, the opportunity, and your strengths to take you forward. And that's where I focus in my work. So I work with individuals who have experienced trauma, which everybody's experienced trauma. You don't need to have a headline worthy something that's going to make people gasp with fear. Even the seemingly little incidents that can happen all build up. Trauma is anything that has an impact on your psychological and physiological well-being. So rather than take people into the trauma swamp, as I do it, because if you want to go swimming in a swamp, then what you end up doing is treading water and eventually you'll drown, is that we stand on the outside. We have an awareness of events and things that we have experienced, but we work with the resources that we have around us and motivate ourselves to let go of that swamp and to dry it up for it not to become our story. An example of that would be, for myself, and I completely appreciate and understand how other individuals who've lost their life partner see this differently, and that's all a matter of choice. But I reject the label of widow. I am not a widow. I guess technically, legally, I might be, but my husband's death does not define who I am as an individual. Becoming widowed was something that happened to me. It's not who I am. So I much prefer to take on labels of who I am rather than the incidents that happened to me. So I reject those labels, but I also reject some of that story. And it's really interesting when I look back now, and obviously the journey that I've been on and the learning that I have done is the morning after my husband had passed away, I can remember going round and shutting all of the blinds in the house so that the outside world was shut out, because I didn't know how I was going to manage everybody in the outside world's expectations of how I was showing up. And probably the easiest way of defining this is saying I felt like I had a role to play now, and that was going to be a Queen Victoria role where I had to dress in black and be sad for the rest of my life, and I couldn't do that. So whether the world accepted it or not, the burden of having to play that role was too big for me, and I couldn't do that to myself. And I certainly wasn't going to allow my children to believe that they had to be sad for the rest of their life. Is actually dishonoring my husband, that would be his legacy, to leave 3 broken children.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's so interesting, and quite often when you see the same type of story played out perhaps with celebrities and things like that and in the media and in the press, and there is always this discourse of how somebody should behave when they have lost a partner, lost their life partner. And I always find it quite astounding. And there does seem to be a different discourse between whether it's a woman who has lost a partner in a heterosexual relationship, if a woman has lost their life partner, or whether a man has lost a life partner. There definitely seems to be different roles to be played by those individuals. Did you feel a pressure from that point of view? Did you feel...
I have seen that. I guess this was where I don't really conform to stereotypings. I had that expectation, but in terms of when I had that capability of making a choice, and something that, if any of my clients use the word should, I say to them, well, quite clearly that's something we shouldn't be doing, because if it comes with a should, then you generally shouldn't. We do the things that we need and we want to, not that we should do. Obviously, there's a certain number of laws and things like that I would say you probably should do.
Yeah, you still need to tick a certain
live
box
within
on a
the
bank
law.
form, I'm sure. But I don't show up in the world how I tick on a bank form. So I'm not, I certainly don't want to be the person that, that kind of how the bank thinks that I should behave. It's just such an interesting thing of how, how these stories are played out. And quite often that's the stories that we know and we see. And then the discussion of how quickly people move on and live their lives, and the opinions that others seem to have. And sometimes it's the people closest to them that have those opinions.
It's very interesting that when this situation, when in becoming widowed, that people also believe that they have a right to an opinion of your life and a right to an opinion of the decisions that you make, as though they know better or that they are informed. I can remember actually a friend at the time, their husband had passed away, had been ill for some time, so it was expected. How I had responded to them at the time of, saying I was there for them if they needed me, if they wanted me to help the children and all of that. And when, after my husband passed away, I actually went to them and I apologized for my reaction to them. And they said, they sort of said to me, I don't know what you mean. You know, you were sorry, you tried to be helpful and all of this. And I went, yeah, I know, but now I've experienced it. I know what it's like, and I know how kind of superficial that feels. That the reality is you do not understand. You have an expectation of what it could feel like, but it's nothing in comparison to the reality. And there's lots of different stereotyping and people having an opinions of whether you should date again, when you should date, why you should date, who you should date, you know, what that means to the children, how you navigate that, whether, you know, I should continue carry on working, whether I should leave, whether I should tell my children the truth. Should I allow them to come to the funeral? Should I allow them to go and visit their dad and go and see him in his coffin? There's all of those things, and everybody has an opinion and a judgment of what is right or wrong. But the reality is you do the best you can and you do what is right for you and your family. And there's always someone with an opinion, but what we need to remember is that opinions and judgment come from the perspective of the individual who is sharing them's issue and not actually about you. So anyone who judges you for any decision that you're making, it's not about you, it's about them.
Absolutely.
It's about the
Absolutely.
impact it has on their life, not on you.
No, that's it. And it's so, it is a difficult thing to happen and imagine when you're in the depths of it. And when I've been in the depths of trauma and somebody has an opinion, it's really difficult to remind yourself of those things. But I suppose that's through your work, through positive psychology, being trauma informed, and all the work that you've done, this journey that you've been on, means that you'll be handling that so much better than most of us in those situations. With the positive psychology, do you work with all kinds of individuals, or do you always take the trauma informed kind of approach? Is it the trauma that you specifically work with?
Okay, so I always take a trauma informed approach, but as
Sorry,
I
yes.
mentioned,
I didn't make myself clear there yet.
trauma is not based on the event. Trauma is about the impact that it's had on you. So I work with individuals who find themselves stuck or overwhelmed or wanting to go to the next level. So they, in one person's judgment, they could be rating quite high on the happiness scale, but there is something about their life and their well-being that they want to take to the next level. So I can work with entrepreneurs, business people who are finding themselves holding themselves back from taking the next level. But I've also worked with people who are struggling with anxiety and overwhelm to function in their day. So, and that's why my business is
Yeah.
happier, because it doesn't matter where you're starting on that point, it's taking you to the next level. There is nobody who I'm ever going to meet that hasn't experienced some kind of trauma.
No, of course. Of course. From what I'm learning about positive psychology, and I'm by no means an expert, but I've had quite a few in-depth discussions, and I suffer from chronic illnesses myself, and I believe that we're always going to need medicine. I know I need medicine for parts of my illnesses. I certainly need investigative procedures at the very, very least. But I also believe there's this holistic side that we can do that can aid and heal and help. Do you believe that positive psychology has a place in those discussions?
Absolutely. So I use positive psychology and I use hypnotherapy and EFT tapping as well with clients. So trauma can manifest itself as illness. A lot of illness actually comes from trauma, not physical trauma, but psychological trauma. If you think about when you're in a place of fear, your central nervous system teaches you to tense your muscles, to restrict blood flow, to restrict breathing to critical function only. So if you are physically in that state, then taking a psychological viewpoint from and using positive psychology strategies helps your central nervous system to calm, to relax, so you breathe better, so your circulation improves, so that the neurochemicals that are released in your body help you flush out some of the toxins that are in your body that can all have an impact. And it's important to work with, doctors and specialists. I've had individuals who come to me with physical pain, and things have been explored, from a medical perspective, of having scans and x-rays to find out whether there's something physically wrong, but that doesn't account for the psychological element of it, of helping to release that trauma from the body.
Well, it's so interesting to me because I believe that certainly for me, I have things that I just have an illness and it's there, but stress, trauma, all of those things will make it worse. Inflammation in my body is a huge factor. So it's that catch too, where there could have been trauma that caused it, but then you then get into that cycle of, if you have a chronic illness, you then can almost create more trauma to yourself because you've got the mental toughness of it, the wanting to continue with your life, if I'm an ambitious person, I've got a business, I don't want to be sitting on the sofa and things like that all day. And I want to choose life and I want to go out there and have adventures and experiences and all of those things. You're in that kind of 360 of, okay, look after myself, but you just keep going. And I think it's really important that people know that there is other things that they can be doing, that yes, you're not going to stop going to see the consultants and the doctors. Likely, there's still going to be things that needed to be looked after, but there is this holistic side. And I think from what I'm hearing and what I've heard about positive psychology is that it could have a massive impact on, if people don't like the sound of the traditional therapy, the kind of old fashioned way of looking at things, then I think if people learn more about it, I think people underestimate the impact that it can have alongside everything else that you were doing. And when you were talking about the kind of medical world, talking about mental health and trying to fix you, there are so many chronic illnesses, autoimmune disorders that can't be fixed like that. And that's why doctors are coming unstuck and people are left in this referral circle of doom, let's call it, where they're just sent from pillar to post to see people. And like you say, they're having scans, they're having x-rays, and nothing's coming up because they're just trying to fix one thing and they're not all talking to each other. So if you're seeing one doctor for one thing and he sends you to see somebody else for another thing, but then they don't come back to discuss. Whereas if you can bring it together with something like positive psychology, or indeed find something that works for you in that space, then it can bring everything together because it's not trying to fix the one pain. It's looking at the central nervous system. It's looking how you live your life on a daily basis and what your thoughts are doing, what you're doing. And I think it's really underestimated of the impact that it can have on people who suffer like I do.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the theories is we look at, so, in doing my master's and doing my own research for my thesis, what I wanted to understand is why it was the case that some people could experience trauma and then achieve this growth, whilst others found themselves getting more and more lost, and what made that difference. And in comparison to other areas in psychology, there's really limited work that's been done in this area. And there's been some work that points at different personality traits, or whether you have money, or whether you have community around you. And those things do make a difference. But fundamentally, the irrelevant of the type of trauma that you experience, irrelevant of who you have around you, or how much money you have, or what star sign you are, and all of those things, there's one key thing that makes the difference. And that's about your belief. Individuals who believe that they are a consequence of their existence, of the universe. So it doesn't matter what you do, how hard you try, things are going to knock you down. You're either meant to have this kind of destiny, or you're not. Those individuals will struggle, and they struggle because they don't have the belief. So they don't put the effort in. They don't see the opportunity. They don't see potential there. On the other side, those that have experienced post-traumatic growth are individuals that believe there's a potential for them to make a difference. So they make that small change, and that small change leads to positive recognition, that they then make a bigger change, and then they build another one, and then they build another one. It's how we build our businesses and we take on new challenges. You know, a good saying is always, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Absolutely.
And you start taking that motivation and momentum, and with that, as you get proven success, it enables you to build confidence and take that next motivation. And having that belief that there is the opportunity to do something differently, to write the next chapter, to change what happens next, means that you keep a lookout for those opportunities and you make a decision. If you put me back into that corporate world, if my husband hadn't passed away, what would have made me make that change? Because I stuck with and in a role and living a lifestyle that I had been conditioned to learn. So one of the key things is I have a book out there published. I did a collab book before that. So I'd authored a chapter before, which gave me the potential to write my own book. And I can remember writing the Post-it note to say, that would really like to write a book. And I wrote it on a Post-it note and I stuck it on my notice board. And at the time, I stuck it on the notice board, and there was a voice inside my head that said, yeah, but you're not going to do that because you're not very good at English. And I kind of ignored it and thought, well, I'm going to put it there and maybe. But having that maybe meant that when the opportunity came up and I was asked to be an author of a chapter in a book, I was like, well, that might be the first step into me writing my own book. So I'm going to say yes. If I hadn't have done that, if I didn't have that belief, then I would never have written that Post-it note and I would never have taken that opportunity. But what's really sad about it is when that book was published, for me, I'd proved a point. I'm not rubbish at English. I'm an author out there. I'm a recognized author. An editor has looked at my chapter I wrote and they have agreed, and now it's bound and it's in a book and it's on the shelf. So I went and got a symbol I had been given a book at primary school. If you put extra effort in, we were given what was called progress prizes, and you used to get a voucher with this progress prize where you could go to the local bookshop and select a book. And I had been given this progress prize because I'd made this effort in English. And I had gone to the bookshop and I had bought this book, The Little Wooden Horse. It was a story that they had been reading in class. And in the front, they stuck my little certificate that I had made progress in English. So I made a decision that I was going to find that book in all of that loft junk and pull it out. And I was going to put it on my shelf in pride of place, along with my first book that I was co-author of. And I have, and it is on the shelf together. But the sad thing is that I looked at that certificate. I was 6 years old when I was given that message. A 6-year-old was told, even though given a progress prize, what it meant to me was I wasn't very good at English. So I wasn't destined to be able to write a book. I've blown that one out of the water now.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely, you have.
if I had held on to what I was told when I was 6 years old, I would never have written that book. But because of my experiences, I was like, well, hell yeah, I'm going to give it a go and do it anyway. Because what's the worst that can happen? Because for me, the worst had already happened.
Worst had already happened. And this is it. It's at what point what is the catalyst? You know, and like you said about everybody's trauma is different, doesn't need to be a headline making trauma for it to be trauma indeed. And it's the same with the catalyst, everybody's catalyst of what they'd be different. My children are my why. And when people say, oh, but it needs to be deeper, I said, well, it is deeper because I'm ambitious. I don't have this podcast for my children. I don't have the things I do in my business for my children. But the reason I do it all is for them. And I can't say I would even have the business because I started the business after my second maternity leave. Because the corporate world, well, I wasn't even really in the corporate world, it was more private sector, but it wasn't going to work. The logistics weren't going to work. I was a very different person. I was an older mum. I just was, very different person. And I was like, I can't go back. So I can't say that had I not gone through that I would even have the business, because I always wanted a business. Well, up until that point, like you, I was sitting in my job, doing my job, earning great money, great career. But, that's what I was sitting doing, always kind of looking with one eye of what else was out there, but not taking the leap. Always there was an excuse, and it took that. So it is those catalysts that then do, but it is about the belief, and it is knocking down those bad beliefs, if you want to call them that, and building the belief that you can actually do those things. Forget not saying I can't. It's not about the can'ts, it's about the cans. And, and thinking about, well, why can't I? And it's that thing as well about the success. If people think, oh, I can't be successful because they're already doing what I want to do over there. No, they should be your belief that you can do it, because why not you? If they can do it, so can you, and it's just, and like you say, it's different people and different personality traits, and what one people will see as an opportunity, another person will see as a reason not to do it. And it is fascinating to find out the reasons why. And it's something that comes up on this podcast quite a bit. Now, as you know, I ask everybody 3 joy questions before they come on the podcast. And I could talk to you all day about positive psychology and everything, but it is a podcast and I do need to make sure I get these questions in. So the first question is the joy spotlight. A favourite thing that has shaped your business or work?
So I think, for me, that spotlight, it has to be that decision where it really was a dark time for me. And I made that decision that hell, I didn't care what it was going to take. If I was going to have to endure life's challenges and do all of this, then I was going to do it my way, and to do it and meet what I wanted to do, and to hell with what other people's expectations are. So it's about making that decision, really. I think the other point of joy for me had to be in that lecture room when I was first introduced to post-traumatic growth, and understanding that you can come out happier after trauma. Now, there's a little bit of a guilt. I'm a little bit of question that after my husband died, I created a business that's called Happier. Some people could take that in a very different way to the one that it's intended to be meant. But understanding post-traumatic growth and being given access to my purpose in life, to have that revelation that everything that I had been through to this point was to enable me to ensure that other people don't get stuck. So where you say you don't do your business, that it's not for your children, you do it for you, but it obviously has consequence. But doing our businesses also enables our children to see us, that we are going for our dreams, that we're challenging ourselves, that we're reaching out. And even if they don't want to do the business that we're in, which I'm quite sure mine don't want to do, they think that anything's possible because they know that their mum works out a way of finding out how do you do a podcast? How do you write a book? How do you show up at an event? How do you go and be a speaker? How do you learn a new skill? And that it's all possible, that there isn't anything set in gold. That you don't have to do anything. So I think it's discovering those teachings really for me, and that scientific evidence, because it was really important. And one of the things that I try to emphasize to people is that it's not that you're broken, and it's not that you're dysfunctional, when you are in that place of being stuck and overwhelmed, that's actually how your body's designed to work. Our physical design is not to look for joy. Our physical design is to keep us stuck exactly where we're supposed to be. So going beyond that, you're already stretching and challenging yourself, and having that learning and understanding is everything that has inspired me to go forward.
I think the one word that you've used a few times and you've used in this Joy Spotlight Pit, and it's something that I wish more people would realise, is the word decision, and that everything is a decision or a choice and we just have to make it. And I think when you spoke about as well that, that it's something that happened to you, it wasn't who you are, it doesn't define you. And I think that can be, there is not many parts of your life that you couldn't say that about, and say that this is a decision that I make today, that this is how I'm going to show up, this is how I'm going to live, this is how I'm going to move forward. And I think too many people are just sitting there waiting for the things to happen. And even if they're hoping and wishing and thinking they're making all of the moves, that you still have to make the decision to go. And you did. And I think that is one of the bravest things that I've heard. So, second question is, inspired by joy, a book or a mentor that changed your life?
I think there's a number. I mean, I fully immersed myself into learning and listening. Brené Brown, Tony Robbins, Mel Robbins, Martin Seligman's work. He was considered to be the founder of positive psychology. So he was the head of the American Psychological Society. All of those great people who have explored work and tried to get out there the messages that change our historical thinking of how the mind and body worked, to make a difference and to change and to do something different. I think there's learnings and inspiration in all of that.
I love that. I love that. I've not actually heard of, was it Martin?
Martin Seligman.
Yeah, I haven't heard of him. I'll need to go and have a look at that. So the third one is your joy killer, the one thing you would like to see removed from the world.
So this I've put down as perfectionism. So that belief as though there's some euphoric place of who you should be, what things should look like, and how you have to get everything right and in place before you're allowed to tick that box of being happy. So we have to look a certain way. We have to earn a certain amount of income. We have to have a family setup that looks a certain way. And if we have any kind of chink in our armor that actually is the reality of making us who we are, then that's something that we can continually feel guilt or shame about. And it steals people's lives away from them, of fearing that they're not good enough. And I think that also, where you said about decision and choice, I think it gets you stuck in a position where you're waiting for permission to do something. You're waiting
Absolutely.
for someone to tell you you're good enough. You're good enough at English that we will allow you to go and write a book. And actually, I could write a book exactly who I was there and then. I don't have to be a perfect version of myself before I am able or ready to do something.
And it goes back to that thing as well about being ready, like being ready as a decision. You just decide one day that I am ready, because before that there's not enough preparation you could ever do. And in terms of the perfectionism of people and the lives that people choose to live, I've yet to meet somebody who has turned around and said, that's it, I've got it. I've ticked all the boxes and I'm at perfectionism. And it's really good and I'm really happy. I've yet to meet that person. I think if we were to even the people that we may look at and think that they've done it, I think if we went and sat with them around their dinner table, we'd find a very different idea that they live, that is their life, that is their truth, that is, and the chinks and everything behind closed doors, because often in this world we're comparing it to social media or something on the telly or something like that, whereas that's just, nobody puts their disaster reel on. They only put their happy stuff on, which is exactly what we should do, because that's exactly what we should be sharing, as long as, but then you also, like, I choose to follow real and authentic people, I think. I do. That's how they come across to me. So, and sometimes I know it's still their highlights, and then every now and again they'll show that life just isn't quite how you think it is, and you think, okay, they are human. They are human, but that's
And
people
that's the
want
thing.
on you go.
The thing is, it's about the word being human, isn't it? Human
Yeah.
isn't about being perfect. And the thing is, there is no end point, because even if you just take something positive, if you said, well, I want to be able to run 1 kilometer. When you've done 1 kilometer, you'll think about doing this 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers, and you build it up and you do more and more. Or you take on, it might not be to carry on that theme. It might be to do a different challenge. But we do, as humans, we are living while we're continuing to grow, whatever that is. We don't get to a level and go, right, okay, I wanted to get to this level. I'm going to sit here and relax here, because that's not what brings us joy and it inspires us. It inspires us, and we find joy in taking the challenge, in taking the fear and doing it anyway, in taking that risk. But we need to do that in a safe way. And that's where the trauma informed element comes into it. So, you don't, if you are someone who is central nervous system is dysregulated and you're feeling very overwhelmed, we don't push and push and push and keep pushing. That's where the phrase of feel the fear and do it anyway becomes toxic. That's not a point at which to feel the fear and do it anyway. That's a point at which you should be regulating. You should be bringing your central nervous system down. It's when you're regulated, when you're feeling calm, you're in that basis, that's when you take on the next challenge to do.
Exactly, and I do, because one of the things that I hadn't actually brought up, but I've scribbled down, was that thing of when you talked about contentment and what comes, and I've found much more contentment with age. And if I looked back at, like, 20-year-old Anne, she was much more like, she was an action taker, she was a doer, but it was very erratic, and it was very kind of go, 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 fast, 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 fast. And as much as I look back and love her for it, there's an element, and I think maybe perhaps it had to come with age for me, but there is much more, like you say, it's that you have to regulate, you have to calm, you have to take a break, you have to take a step back, and you'll come back so much more powerful for it. Whereas there's so many times I took myself to breaking point because I just didn't know any better, and I thought that's what you had to do. And it was also like the early noughties, that's kind of what people did. We've learned quite a lot since then. So yeah, so it's that thing of just understanding that, and goes back to belief, having the belief and trust in yourself that actually I don't need to push through today. This is what I do today. And actually, when we talk about it in business terms, like, you think, if I just do another post, if I just contact one more person, if I just do another email, we're actually come back, reset, regulate, then go again, you'll get a much better result the next time you come out than if you try and keep doing today, which I think all business owners fall into that trap.
Well, I think what you enable is for you to maintain consistency rather than having big highs and lows, and you
Yes.
end up in a situation where you constantly up in burnout. It's a bit like the hare and the tortoise race, isn't it?
Yes.
About, going for it when you're not prepared and ready, and going all in means you're not there for the longer term because you would have burnt out, and then you're back starting at zero again. Whereas if you take yourself along with that journey, then you will get there much faster. Sometimes it's not the fastest who wins that race. Going back to your point about the person you were when you were in your 20s, I think, this comes as part of making decisions and making our mistakes as well. That's
Hmm.
where we learn, as much as learning of the things we love and enjoy, but it's also important to see the contrast of knowing the things that we don't love. It's a bit like our role as parents. Our role as parents is not to tell them, don't do that because I did it and it didn't work for me. So, you don't do that. We're here to guide and to watch them and for them to fail on their own terms and be there to support them in making that decision to get up and go again. They have to experience that. They have to try all of those things out. And it's by being that person who tried those things out that you reach that level of contentment of knowing what's right for you and how that
Absolutely.
works. And I think
Absolutely.
society's pressures are very different as you get older as well.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Don't think I'm ready for my girls to try everything that I tried quite yet.
Yeah, well, we don't tell them that.
No, I'll worry about that in a few years. They're still very little, so I'll worry about that in a few years. If people want to find you, come and speak to you, find out more about the wonderful world that you're creating, where can they come and find you, Claire?
So I'm Happier Coach on social. So I'm happier with an HAPPYA because I like to do things differently and it's a unique way of happier, just like your happiness is unique to you as it is to me. So I have the Happier Life podcast, which you can pick up to hear from me, my book, Blooming Happier, or reach out on socials. And I would love to hear what people have taken away from this episode.
Well, there's definitely been lots to take away. I know definitely that I have. All the links for everything to do with Claire will be in the show notes. You'll be able to just go and click away and find exactly what you want to find. I could continue to chat to you all day, Claire, but as I said, it is a podcast and people do expect it to be in a certain amount of time. So I don't let anybody go without one last question. And that is, and I'm almost scared to ask you this question a little bit, but what is the joy legacy that you would like to leave behind?
I think it's that belief in possibility. Anything is possible. You have to believe in yourself and to make that decision to go all in and leave the world a brighter place than the one that you came in on. And I think if we all worked towards that, we would be in a very different world than we are today.
I'm not going to say anything about that because I think it said enough in itself. And I think you are living, breathing proof of exactly that. And I would like to thank you so much for being so generous with your story. I can't imagine it's something that's easy to tell all of the time as you go through your journey, but it's so important for people to hear it and to hear exactly why you're doing what you're doing. And I know there'll be people who can resonate with it, or can understand it, or maybe begin to look at their trauma a little bit differently. So thank you so much for today.
You're welcome.
That was such an important conversation with Claire, and one that I hope it's given you a new perspective on how trauma shows up in our everyday lives, and perhaps has you looking at your life in a different way and accepting perhaps the trauma that you have been through. And one thing that I know that it's a difficult conversation for Claire to continue to have, but it's so important because there'll be so many people who Claire is helping by sharing and building her business and impacting those lives and making people live a happier life, even when those difficult traumas have happened. Here are my 3 big takeaway from today's episode. Number 1, that trauma isn't always about the big events. It's not a trauma competition. One person's trauma does not trump somebody else's trauma. And that it can be the everyday experiences that quietly leave their mark throughout our life. That if we don't acknowledge and accept them, they are having an impact on our decisions, on our choices, and on this one life that we get to live. Number 2, healing doesn't have to mean reliving the pain. It's about resourcing yourself, finding what grounds you and taking steps forward. What works for one person will not work for another, but there is help out there and there is strategies out there and there are people like Claire who can help you work through that and build the life that you want. And number 3, that gratitude and joy are more than just nice ideas. And this is something that comes up time and time again on this podcast. That if we are grateful for where we are right now, for what we already have, for the small joys that we see every single day in our life, that they are the tools that help us shift from surviving into thriving. We just sometimes need to look. If this episode resonated with you at all, come and continue the conversation inside the Joy Work Club. It's our free communities where business owners like you and I connect, support one another, and build businesses that put joy right at the centre. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, like, share, follow wherever you're watching this. Leave a review, share it with a friend. It really helps spread the word and keeps these conversations going. Until next time, keep choosing joy and keep building a business that feels like freedom.